This is the Soul-Filled Sisterhood podcast, and I'm your host, Nicole Burgess, licensed marriage and family therapist and an empowerment mentor for women. The information shared in this podcast is not a substitute, nor is it to convey professional, psychological, financial, or medical advice. If you could use such services, please seek them out from someone you trust. Now here is today's episode. Episode 50. Today's episode is sponsored by Nicole Burgess, empowerment and leadership coach for high-achieving and introverted women who are ready to end the overwhelmed and stressed out cycle, create balance between their work and home life so they can continue to make a difference in our world. And before I get to today's episodes, I'm going to ask each and every one of you for your support. And what that looks like is, I've stated in previous episodes how my goal is to have this podcast reach a woman in every single country. And how you can help with this, how you can actually show me your support is, one, leave me a review on iTunes. And again, that can be a written review or it can just be a star review. That helps in the podcast world. That helps kind of get that message out when people glance to see whether it's got positive reviews or not. If you're liking what you're hearing, please go out to iTunes and leave me a review. The other way you can help support me in this goal is to tell one woman that you know about this podcast. That's all I ask. That's how you guys can support me. Because again, I know podcasts are free resources for people to get information from. And this is one way for you to help me spread the word about this podcast. Okay, in today's episode, I'm actually going to talk about our body and mind connection and the book by Cuddy, which is called Presence, Bringing Your Boldest Self to Your Biggest Challenges. And she publishes back in 2015 by the Little Brown and Company. At the beginning of her book, she talked about how she was in a car accident when she was 19 years old, and that left her with a traumatic brain injury. And if you're not aware, traumatic brain injuries, there's different levels of them, and it can take many months, if not years, for your brain to truly heal due to that. Anyways, she talks about how it left her feeling, quote, anxious, disoriented, making bad decisions, not sure what to do next, end of quote, in her life. Currently, she's a Harvard Business School professor and social psychologist that she's known around the world, and she continues to do speaking presentations and events and things, and she has a TED Talk from 2012 that you can go out and look at, and I'll put that in the show notes too. Anyway, throughout her book, she shares a lot of scientific research and interviews on the connection between our bodies and our minds. And this is something that when I went to grad school at the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology, which is now called Sophia University, we did a lot of training between the mind-body connection, right? My whole training is in transpersonal psychology, so it is the mind, body, and spirit connection. And you can't separate the two things. And in her book, she really talks about that, how we can manage challenges and stressors in our lives through being more present. And you ladies know, if you've listened to some of my previous episodes, I'm consistently talking about having that self-care, taking time out, especially when those of us who prefer introversion or you're highly sensitive, you need the downtime in order to recharge your batteries, in order for you to sometimes kind of brain dump what's going on in your thought process. And that's staying present, staying grounded in your body, and also being present in the moment. And so Amy talks about, when you're more present, you then can become more aware of your body, your poses, and those small nudges, they can make a really big difference. She defines presence as, quote, is the state of being attend to and able to comfortably express our true thoughts, feelings, values, and potential. She goes on to share that when we're present, we can feel more confident, which I totally agree with that. Again, when we take action and we face our fears and we take those steps forward, we also gain confidence in that as well. We can be more authentic when we're present. We can help others feel more seen and heard when we're truly present. So if you've ever had a conversation, whether it's with your child, with a friend, with a coworker, and you're thinking about your grocery list, the odds are that other person on the receiving end is not feeling quite so heard or seen. And you also have more personal power when you're present. Again, the whole mind-body connection, you can get your intuitive hits from there, which I'm going to do another episode on intuition. You can get your intuitive hits from there. You can register how that information is coming in and then what you want to do with it going out when you are more connected in your mind and body. So if you've not listened to episode 1, I talk about that power of self-reflection and contemplation. And I know for some women that I've worked with, they feel a lot of worry, fears that bubble up when we talk about getting quiet. And there's nothing to be afraid of by getting quiet. Yes, old memories can come up. Yes, they can feel uncomfortable, remember, for a moment, but it's not a forever. Whatever has happened in the past is truly in the past. It's not currently going on. And when we allow ourselves to get comfortable with the discomfort, that's how you begin to grow, to shift, and to change, because you allow that to come up and you can say, okay, what do I want to do with this? What stories am I still telling myself about this? Instead of staying stuck in those past moments, you move forward from them. When I talked in episode 23, I also talked about, the midlife unraveling. This is another episode you can go back and listen to where it's, again, getting comfortable in that self-reflection piece will help you stay more present in this current moment. When you allow yourself to get to know you where you are right now, staying connected with yourself can help you make better decisions going forward. When we're disconnected with ourselves, it's more of looking at outside of yourself for the answers, right? You're giving up your power by letting other people make those decisions for you. By looking outside yourself, you're also giving up your responsibility in that decision-making process. And if you're not staying true to yourself or going within to find that answer. Further in her book, she talks about the imposter syndrome. And there are some women in my Facebook group, which is the Introverted Sensitive Women Achievers. They have talked about how at some point in time, they have felt the imposter syndrome, and everybody does. And that's what Amy talks about. She's like, most of us have felt this at one time or another. And it's not just felt by women or specific demographics. Quote, when we feel like imposters, we don't attribute our accomplishments to something internal and consistent, such as talents or ability. Instead, we credit something beyond our control, such as luck. I have heard it also, imposter syndrome, defined as, like it's something outside of you, like some, those thoughts of who am I to do this work, or, what will people think of me? That is more of that fear-based stuff. And again, part of what Amy talks about in here is when we get present with that one, you just stay curious with it. Stay curious with the thoughts that are coming up. And we know that just because we have a thought doesn't mean it's true. But also, where in your body does that come up? Where in your body do you feel that fear? Where in your body do you feel that nervousness? Where in your body do you feel that disconnection between that thought and who you are? Amy goes into her book regarding specific body poses and how we actually hold our body truly does impact our thoughts and our feelings. And she didn't get this just, miraculously on her own. This has actually been talked about back in the 1800s by William James, who was a philosopher and a psychologist. And Amy incorporates that into her book about this whole mind-body connection. She shares one of her kind of body poses, the Wonder Woman pose, in her TED Talk. And then she shares within her book how other women really resonated with the starfish up, which is standing. When you're standing, your arms are above your head as you scored a goal, and your feet are a hip width apart. So if you're not feeling confident in that moment, if you're struggling with some anxiety, try standing with one of these poses, right? So Wonder Woman is, again, her feet are hip width apart and her hands, they're made into basically a fist, and then they're put onto her hips, or you can just hold your hips with your hands. So either one of those hand gestures, but your hands are on your hips. And when you stand with one of those poses for a minute or two, notice if you begin to feel different. Another body-mind connection that Amy talks about is also yoga. So part of that is there's different poses in yoga. Again, where we hold that stress, where we hold those fears, you can stretch those things out and you can start to feel more confident. I remember recently, I think it was at the end of last year, I was in a group coaching program and we had some mindset, calls. And in one of those calls, well, not one, in many of the calls, the mindset coach, she talked with us about, hey, if we're feeling extremely kind of emotional about something, right? Whether it was due to nervousness or there was thoughts of, I can't do this. I don't know where I'm going. First, she normalized it like, hey, we all go through these things, very similar to the imposter syndrome piece of it. But she also said, she's like, okay, stand up. Shift that emotional state. So that was another reminder. It's like, oh yeah, how we hold ourselves really can impact our emotional state. It doesn't mean you need to hurry up and get through the sadness if you're feeling sad. It doesn't mean you need to hurry up and get through any emotion that you're going through. But if you think you're getting stuck in that emotion, pay attention to how you're holding your body. And then maybe you honestly do need to stand up, put your shoulders back. And like I remember growing up, our parents would talk about, it's like a string is on top of your head. And if you pulled that string up, your head would come up, your shoulders would go back, and your spine would align. I'm not necessarily describing it as wonderfully as my parents would do, but it was also about that body posture. So if you're feeling really collapsed, meaning your shoulders are forward, your kind of head is bent down, your body is bent down, you're going to be in a very disempowered body pose. And then you can truly embrace that emotion for what it is, fully feel it to the nth degree, and then make that decision to say, okay, I felt it, now I'm moving on. That's really what Amy is talking about in her book, is first be present with the emotions. That's all good. It's also not getting stuck in that. To feel really empowered is paying attention to how you hold your body. It's also paying attention to, you can shift that with various body postures. If you work at a desk most of the day, pay attention to, are you slumped over? Most people are. I mean, I find myself, if I'm doing something for a long time, whether I'm writing up notes or sometimes even doing the podcast show notes, I can be slumped over when I'm typing up things. And then I have to, remind myself, very similar to what yoga can do, is to put my shoulders back and sit up straight, feet both, on the floor. And that just shifts kind of that thought process and just the mood that I'm in when I'm doing these things, if I'm needing to do that for an extended amount of time. The other thing to pay attention to is, how do you drive? Even just focus on how you hold your body when you're driving. If there's a lot of traffic and you often get frustrated because it's slow moving depending on where you live, pay attention to, okay, now's the moment I can take a deep breath and I can enjoy the slowness of this. I can just notice what's going on around me. I can pay attention to my breathing and pay attention to the traffic that's around me. I can change the radio station and put on something more calming and relaxing, or jam through it, right? And get all excited about what's playing on the radio, or have some beautiful conversations with your kiddos that are in the car while you are driving. It's being very present and in the moment with that. In the last part of Amy's book, she talks about these small incremental changes, or she calls them nudges, can really lead to big changes in our life. And she said, nudges are effective for several reasons. So, quote, one of them is they're small and they require minimal psychological and physical commitment. 2, nudges operate via psychological shortcuts. And 3, our attitudes follow from our behaviors. I know you've heard me say this before if you've listened to some of my previous podcasts, is that our neurons that fire together wire together, which means when you do very specific behaviors over and over, those behaviors are reinforced. And as Amy, I love this quote from Amy, as she states in her TED Talk and in this book, she says, don't fake it till you make it. Fake it till you become it. So if there's one thing that you could do today, pay attention to, I'm going to invite you to, pay attention to how you hold your body. If you're feeling really overwhelmed, if you're feeling frustrated, if you're feeling sad and you've been in that state for, I don't know, maybe an hour or more, pay attention to how are you holding your body. Again, I'm not negating the emotion you feel. I want you to feel it. It's also looking at, okay, is it time for me to kind of put a time limit on how I'm feeling so I can move forward? And then pay attention to that and do one of her body poses, right? Do the Wonder Woman pose, do the starfish up pose, sit straight back in your seat if you're sitting down and put both feet on the floor. All of these things help you get back into your body and shift the thoughts and the emotional state that are going on inside of you. So again, ladies, I appreciate you listening. And if you are enjoying what you're hearing, please go out to iTunes, leave me a rating and or a review. That would be lovely because it really does help out in the podcast world. And I'm going to invite you to please share this with one woman that you know so that we can hit that goal, because this is about sisters connecting with one another, where it can reach one woman in every single country. That would be lovely. All right, take care. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I hope you found it helpful or inspirational or even encouraging wherever you are right now in your life. If you know of another woman who may find this podcast inspirational or encouraging, please pass this along to her. I really do appreciate you taking the time to listen. Until next time, take care.